The Who. The Who are one of the best bands ever, if not the best, and are most certainly on a very short list for my own favorite bands I've ever heard. The music they made played a very formative part in how I perceived the very idea of being in a rock band. They really did it all. They mastered the art of writing singular songs and also writing pitch-perfect albums. They were an incomparably tight, well-oiled live band and studio wizards all the same. Any of their songs could feature either acoustic guitars or synthesizers, and they had a roster of songs that were era-defining but yet forward-thinking. Summoners of firecrackers and banjos. But improbably, it all always came together as one unified package. For years, I have said that there is a convincing argument for The Who being the best band of all time, which is always a frivolous and ultimately pointless endeavor, but let's be real, everybody's put at least a little bit of thought into it before. And for my money, The Who probably claims that title. For reasons like their versatility, as previously stated, yes, but also because of every band member's musicianship. Every person in The Who can realistically be considered to be the best to ever pick up their respective instrument. Keith Moon is one of the most bombastic drummers to have ever lived, with a style that is impossible to replicate. Roger Daltrey had a vocal range and sheer intensity unlike anybody else. And who hasn't met 1,000 bass players who just desperately want to be John Entwistle? If the first song you ever learned on bass was Boris the Spider, raise your hand. I just got quite a few of you right now, didn't I? And Pete Townsend is an inspiration to studio brains and windmilling guitarists everywhere. They were also touted as the loudest band in history. That quintessential and iconic Marshall stack was of their own design. Daltrey could hark and belt it like no other, and Keith Moon, what can I even say? There were urban legends of the band playing a stadium show, and the band playing so loud that the fish in the nearby rivers would turn belly up from the sheer intensity. But yet, they could still dial it back and give small, earnest, and sincere songs too. So here's a celebration of The Who. I'll be giving my own personal ranking of their first 8 studio albums. And I'm including Live at Leeds, because if you release a live album that is that good, I just can't ignore it. And this should go without saying, but these are obviously just my own personal rankings. And I'm only including their albums with Keith Moon. Even the band themselves aren't really over the moon with their 80s output, even if it was continued success for the band. And good for them for that, but I don't think the music itself is something really worth keeping around. Eminence Front is the only song truly worthwhile, and it's the only song from that decade that The Who keeps in their live sets to this day. And I'm not all that crazy about You Better You Bet, and Athena is just a flat-out dud for me. And believe me, there is more than enough to appreciate without throwing those albums into the mix too. So here we go! Their last classic album. The band was battered and tattered at this point, and nobody sounds alert or with it enough to make a great album at this time. Keith Moon's death from his substance abuse shortly after the album's release brought the band to an unceremonious close and left a pretty subpar album in the wake. The title track is the clear-cut, most worthwhile song on here by a country mile. It has a distinct and different style from their past material and convincingly plays back into their hoodlum street antics. Daltrey even managed to get an F-bomb on the radio. Not one, but 2. Went for years on the radio stations, out in the open and uncensored. The rest of the album goes off like a squib, and even when they are trying something different, it's always a half attempt and never fully comes together. Like on a track like Sister Disco, they vaguely gesture at disco music, but it never really comes to fruition. My issues with this album kind of echo the shortcomings that plagued Led Zeppelin's final studio recordings. There are some great moments and songs scattered in there somewhere, but the issues with the band were too prominent and actually infiltrate the music itself. The band sounds preoccupied elsewhere, not least of which is Keith Moon, unfortunately. His addictions grew so rampant, he could barely lay down drum tracks for the album, and his performances can't hold a candle to any of his past recordings. The album isn't terrible, but it is a rather lackluster note for such a revolutionary band to go out on, but it does have its defenders. Listen for yourself and find out what your conclusion is. Here's where it all got started. Well, their story technically started off with their first incarnation as the High Numbers, but The Who Sings My Generation is where the story of The Who gets pressed to wax. If you've gone through the band's later albums, and only then came back to the band's point of origin here, this record will sound startling for a couple of reasons. Their primary influence here is one that they've mostly dropped in their subsequent works, because this album's sound is owed almost entirely to American soul music, with these English lads giving their own spin on it. It surprisingly kind of works, especially given their limitations as recording artists at the time. Daltrey in particular gives an interesting interpretation on soul music. Hearing him sing James Brown makes way more sense than you'd think. The Who's first album is among the strongest debut albums from the British Invasion bands. Off the top of my head, I'm blanking if they were first wave or second wave to the Invasion. My gut is saying second wave. But I think this record is stronger than debut albums from their peers The Kinks, The Zombies, The Rolling Stones, and The Animals. The group was forcefully young, and the music was vibrant and plucky. Shel Talmy's production work here fits really well for their sound. Townsend uses some rather interesting guitar moves that he doesn't repeat on following albums, just making the most of his immediate surroundings. Like, there's this trick he does on a handful of songs where he'll take his pickup switcher and just rapidly flick it back and forth. Like, he'll play a chord and then just... The band also conjures up some really catchy melodies to play around with, displayed on songs like La 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 Lies, Legal Matter, and the Who standard The Kids Are Alright. It's impossible not to talk about the title track, My Generation, an absolute counterculture anthem that rewrote the entire rock playbook. Key changes every minute, a singer that can't be bothered to properly enunciate, and probably the first ever rock bass solo. There's great footage of them playing this song on live TV, and the camera would instinctively zoom in on the guitar during the bass solo, where Townsend wouldn't be playing anything. And the song gets its power from the idea that teenagers are just terrifying. They have too much aimless ambition and way too much time on their hands. This truth of life is embedded into rock music's very nature. The true beating heart of rock music is encapsulated by I Hope I Die Before I Get Old. Brilliant. That's punk before punk. I also have to give massive props to the final track, The Ox, an instrumental titled after Entwistle's nickname, which is one of the filthiest, most outrageous pieces of garage rock ever made at the time. The guitar is in such a low register, and this is where Keith Moon gets to show off and play into his animalistic side. The guitar basically melts down into squelching feedback, which was so unlike anything else at the time. This was in 1965, like, what? How? Is it a great album? Probably not. I don't know how noteworthy this album would be if it wasn't recorded by The Who. But most of these songs are at least good, and it occupies a unique space of its own when standing next to any of their other albums. This is a rather unsuspecting record. One could easily call it The Who's Diamond in the Rough, the real dark horse of The Who's discography. After album of high-concept, intensive studio work, it makes sense why they would want to sit down and just make a rock album again. The band pokes fun at the straightforward approach in the album's title, The Who by Numbers, which might sound like they're setting their sights low, but even when The Who gets back to basics and settles on recording just a rock album, it's still going to be something fantastic. Slip Kid opens the album, and it isn't the usual full-force blow to the back of the head that The Who usually reserves for their album openers. This one grooves instead, focusing on some Latin percussion and some much-welcomed cowbell action. The track, However Much I Booze, borders on self-reflection, wrapped inside of a gleefully country-tinged package. Definitely a highlight on here. Dreaming from the Waste has grown to be a real fan favorite in the Who catalog for good reason. Blue, Red, and Gray is a heartwarmingly quaint song, and one of the handful of ukulele songs that are truly great. Sorry, ukulele fanatics of the world, but prove me wrong. Let me know what your ukulele songs of choice are. And who would have thought that the ukulele playing against Entwistle's French horn would pair so well together? While I've always liked The Who's sense of humor, like Fiddle About is an all-time favorite stupid song in my eyes, and Keith Moon's atrocious Cockney bloke singing on Bellboy is so memorable, Squeezebox here just doesn't really do it for me. The joke is fine. I think that somebody somewhere had to make this joke at some point, so it's probably good that they got to it first, but it doesn't have much replay value. Put it in the same box of rock novelty songs that Chuck Berry's My Ding-a-Ling is sitting in. The Who by Numbers should have by all means been an album they'd have phoned in, but they still bring some great material to the table and prove that there is still gas left in the tank. Its only problem is that it might not have as many memorable songs as their other albums, but the quality is there, don't be fooled. A perpetually restless rock band, on their second studio album they were already looking to break the confines of this brave new world of album recording. They gave their second album a theme. Not a concept like their later works, no, but an inventive creative process to tie the album together. Seeing as how The Who were an all-for-one, one-for-all band, they decided to divvy up the songwriting in even 4 ways. Every member was to contribute 2 songs to the album, which was incredibly impressive at a time where it was still customary to pad out an LP with covers and the such. Considering how many bands of this era consisted only of one songwriter and a backup band there to ride their coattails, having 4 songwriters in one group was quite the package. Given this democratic song process, this album is John Entwistle's golden hour as a songwriter. His penned track, Boris the Spider, might just be the most famous on this album, and his other contribution, Whiskey Man, is just fantastic all around. Unfortunately, his skills in songwriting often went underutilized on later albums, reportedly because Townsend actually felt threatened by his talents. But still, I'm just glad that we even got what he put on this album. John Entwistle also had a pretty fulfilling solo catalog that's worth checking out as well. His debut solo effort, Smash Your Head Against the Wall, is a quality listen. Roger Daltrey was the only one who didn't meet the songwriting quota and only brought one song to the table, See My Way, which I think is the weakest one on the album. But I don't want to be too hard on the guy. It's like critiquing a fish for being subpar at climbing trees, right? The empty spot on the tracklist allowed the band to cover Martha and the Vandellas' Heat Wave, and I think they did a bang-up job on what was an already fantastic tune, so it all works out. Keith Moon's songs? Cobwebs and Strange is the textbook definition of insanity. It is the clearest cut example of why you should never let your drummer write the songs. It is just so bonkers. Words cannot express my deep love for how utterly cuckoo bananas the song is. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the closing song, Pete Townshend's A Quick One While He's Away. This is notable for being Townshend's first attempt at writing a rock suite. It's a sprawling, 9-minute long song with so many miniature songs all strung together. It's a mighty triumphant finish to the album. It also has one of my favorite bits of music trivia ever, which is that the band wanted to hire a pocket symphony to play on its outro, but the budget wouldn't allow for it. So instead, you can hear them singing on the outro to this song, cello, 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 cello. Necessity is the mother of invention. Also, if you're curious, the most famous of the 21st century rock operatics, Green Day, did a cover of this song, and it really isn't half bad. Having debates about who is the best band of all time is pretty silly when you get down to it, isn't it? It's all in good fun, but at the end of the day, it's pretty pointless. I've made my own mini arguments for and against a number of bands who have the claim of being the greatest to ever do it. If you catch me on a particular day, I could wax poetic about how the influence and song-for-song batting average of the Velvet Underground makes them worthy to the title. But on another day, I could vouch for Led Zeppelin if I felt like it. The real boring answer is probably the right one. I mean, the Beatles. I don't need to go into it. You already know why they're probably the best band of all time. For all that they've done that will never, ever be repeated again, the Beatles are pretty much locked into that top spot. But there is one big oversight to this line of thinking, though. For everything they revolutionized, they were never a very good live band. At least, they never made the great Beatles live album. It's up to you to say how important that is, but to compare and contrast, I've heard some very compelling arguments for the Grateful Dead being the greatest band in history, solely because of their prowess as a live act, being able to transform their music into something new and great with every performance. Having great live shows aren't the be-all end-all, but what if you can have both? That's where The Who doubles down with arguably the greatest live album in history, certainly one of them. Coming off their meticulously planned Tommy album, Live at Leeds is hog-wild and utterly explosive, displaying the unmatched power of them as a live act. It transports you directly to a live show at The Who's peak. Even the mixing of this album was inspired with that goal in mind. The bass is firmly in the left channel and the guitar in the right, coupled with the packaging emulating bootleg vinyl and a label stating that the crackling from the bass was intentional. It's all part of the Who experience. It's up to personal preference of which release of Live at Leeds that you prefer. I personally think that the original vinyl LP release is too short and only really picks up when it gets to its second side, which is only 2 songs long. I would try to find one that features the Who songs that don't appear on other Who albums. Heaven and Hell is one of Entwistle's best and is sizzling with band intensity as their opening song, just the band warming up for this legendary show. And other tracks like Happy Jack are stellar too. And there is an edition that features their performance in full, which includes the band playing Tommy in its entirety, if that sounds interesting to you. If you're going off the original release, the second side has an ultra medley of Who songs that is just next level. A 15-minute long cut, daisy-chaining their songs together, James Brown style. And of course, it has the essential rendition of Magic Bus. The Who is a band that had to be experienced live to be believed, but this is the next best thing. What? Who's next? Is this low on this list? Blasphemy! This belongs in everybody's top 3. It's this album's God-given right. Well, that should tell you how bulletproof their discography really is, that I can find 3 more albums in their canon that I like even more than this irrefutable masterpiece. This is the one that makes the most sense as a standalone collection of songs, the pick-up-and-play album that every budding rock fan deserves. It is a remarkable culmination of everything this band has done in their career, all while making some of the most legendary rock music to ever grace the radio airwaves. So many of these songs are insurmountable rock touchstones that there's no way I could even bother adding anything to the discussion. Like, what am I supposed to say about album opener Baba O'Reilly except, dang, what an exceptional song. I can list my personal highlights, though, I suppose. Bargain is a fan favorite and a real roller coaster ride to listen to. Daltrey and Moon give some real career best performances here. I guess I'm gonna be gunning for another Entwistle song, because his song called My Wife is just so amazing. The horn section that punctuates the track is some of my favorite material on any song they have ever done, and the lyrics are gut-bustingly funny to boot. The true crown jewel in my eyes is This Song Is Over. Just a stunning and moving song that really transcends itself to some other level that I can't even fully articulate but still feel regardless. This track was a holdover from their aborted Lifehouse project, and I suppose a track like this hints at what depths they would later reach on Quadrophenia. The synthesizer work is especially breathtaking, and it adds to the moment-out-of-time feeling this song has that would be impossible to replicate. And Won't Get Fooled Again is an all-timer for album closers. The lyrics have some of the most bite of anything they'd ever do, and the simple, complex dichotomy of Townsend's songwriting shines here. It's such a basic song in chords, A major, G, D, rinse, repeat, but the band uses style and their internal band chemistries to turn it into a song. And whenever this song comes to an end, thus the album ends too, my brain automatically fills in the sound of crackling vinyl and the needle picking itself up from off the record, as that's the way I've heard it so many times, always sitting in a stunned silence at the record's end. Definitely not an album to be ignored, but their best work is still yet to come. The top 3 spots on my list are occupied by their 3 concept albums. Shocker, I know. This is the first of 3 non-consecutive concept albums they would write, but this is the only one of which that isn't a rock opera. It's more thematic, a general through line that may or may not run through all these songs. The Who Sell Out is a fantastic title, proving right here that the band cannot and will not be boxed into any preconceived notions. The band tackles commercialism head-on in a most scathing manner, recreating those mindless adverts that we've all grown so accustomed to, so they can tear it down from the inside out, attacking its very foundation. The lyrics use commercialist icons of daily life and takes advantage of the ulterior motives of these advertisements. But the genius lies in the band still finding an emotional center to these songs. Just about every song on here is about a product and how it can enrich your life if you buy it, usually written about dependency on any of these purchases. But they still cleverly write a story around these products, an actual human connection at the heart of these advertising fallacies. For instance, in the song Tattoo, societal expectations regarding masculinity dupes 2 teenagers into getting tattoos from the idea that you can simply buy your own manliness. But the lyrics still focus on the state of mind of the characters and taps into some real youthful nostalgia by doing so. A track like Odorono does much of the same, and that's not even to mention the pirate radio stings that filter their way into the track list, each one different from the last. I don't hear many people talk about the album opener, Armonia City in the Sky, and that's a shame because it's a real favorite of mine. Why? Because The Who goes full psych rock on us and I can't get enough of it. Daltrey uses a highly unusual nasal tonality to his singing, and that crazy chord change on the chorus just gets me every time. What a genius chord change. What else? I Can See for Miles is the album's trophy song, of course, and Townsend considered it his very best at the time and was crestfallen when it only achieved moderate success. I absolutely love the hammock-lounging, hippie folk approach on Mary Ann with the Shaky Hand, and that whirling tremolo effect on the vocals makes me grin every time I hear it. Someday before I die, I am determined to learn how to play Pete's guitar on Sunrise, a spare acoustic moment on the album. Townsend's first instrument was actually the banjo, and it's speculated that the bridge to this song actually uses a banjo picking technique, which makes it seem very difficult to the non-banjo inclined. He uses the same technique on Tommy's Overture. The staunchly minor-keyed tall tale of Silas Stingy was always a song I had a lot of respect for, and I eventually grew to love the album's closer. A rather unusually structured song that doesn't give much sense of finality, but still caps off the album in an interesting way. It's an acquired taste, and you might notice a bit of conceptual continuity, if you will, as the main motif of Tommy's underture makes an appearance in the song's third movement. This just might be the signature Who album. It is just a mighty impressive work of songwriting, first and foremost. It is always the songwriting that it all circles back around to. The loudest band of all time is mostly acoustic and stripped back here, always working for the song each and every time. The levels of thought and planning ahead required to make this album is incomprehensible. Leitmotifs flow in and out of these songs with ease, never feeling shoehorned in, and often tie into each song's general concept without overstaying its welcome. I don't know if I'm alone in this, but the first song, the Overture, is just a mind-meltingly amazing song that I can imagine very, very few other rock bands being able to actually pull off. Many of the musical ideas and riffs and such are strung together in brilliant fashion. It's not a half-rate copy-paste job. The real achievement is that they can use the same piece of music, sometimes reinterpreted at a later point in the album, and manipulate it so it brings a completely different mood or emotion depending on its placement. It's the same passage of music, but it evokes a completely different emotion depending on where they put it on the album. How do you do that? When the entire band drops out on this opening, and it's just Townsend playing his ramshackle blues over the first two lyrics on the album, it is jaw-droppingly good. Some of the best guitar playing I had ever heard when I first listened to this album in high school. I personally love how the acoustic guitars drive a lot of these songs, and emphasize the strong framework that a lot of this music is built on. Some may find it a little dull once you get past the initial novelty of listening to a rock opera. Maybe it sounds a little soft or samey to some listeners. If this album has one thing, it is personality. Just about every song adds a different color to the larger picture, and the music itself probably does more heavy lifting for the story than any of the overarching lyrics do. The harmonic progressions are just so strong here. The vocal lines on Cousin Kevin shows how inventive they were at composing melodies. For the story itself, it's fun, but yeah, the plot of the album doesn't pan out in the slightest and doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Good concept. Kid goes dumb, deaf, and blind after witnessing his mother murder his father. Good stuff. But anything past that is just super hokey. The individual songs have good plots, but do nothing for the larger story. I can't say much more without just going into every song after song after song on here, because this is the kind of album that benefits from going over every section with a fine-toothed comb. So I'll save your time and my breath by just saying it is really, really good. Without a shadow of a doubt in my mind, my pick for my number one Who album is Quadrophenia. Simply put, I do not know how I would have gotten through my teenage years without the Quadrophenia album, where the plot of Tommy was muddled at best and running on fumes by the time you get to side 4. Quadrophenia is the most concentrated and emotionally poignant rock opera they ever made. The songs are darker and have serious weight to them, further brought on by the band playing in an E-flat tuning now. But it doesn't get lost in its own depression. It still finds time to balance it out with different styles, like the rollicking piano songs that come on side 3, or some of the surprise horn sections that pop up on the album. I love acoustic Who. Tommy has that in spades and is great, but introducing Pete's synthesizers and all the bells and whistles allows him to go full mad scientist here. As you can tell from this video, Tommy is an absolute favorite of mine, but Daltrey doesn't have much excuse to go above and beyond as a vocalist on that record. Which is good and fine, it benefits the songs on that album to be singing in that way. Same goes for Keith Moon. But on Quadrophenia, he uses all his might as a vocalist to become the embodiment of youthful recklessness, personifying frustration with the world and yourself that shouts out this terrible, primal angst that exists in the darkest corners of our souls sometimes. It sounds like I'm being melodramatic maybe, but a song with the stunning darkness of Dr. Jimmy, matched with him howling at the top of his register, fighting through some of the best voice cracks in recorded music history, is just breathtaking. Adolescent impulses run deep through this record, constantly disavowing anything and everybody, embracing that strange teenage feeling of everything being out to get you. Even The Who themselves aren't safe, as the protagonist realizes that his favorite band, The Who, are frauds and products of a bygone time of counterculture. The only thing you can depend on is yourself, and that can be so difficult when you're going through your own personal struggles. Anybody who knows me in real life knows this already, but the final song on the album, Love, Rain Over Me, is unequivocally my favorite song ever made, and I have thought extensively about this before. To me, it is just perfection, from the songwriting, the masterful production, the variance in dynamics, and by God, these performances. I've said earlier in this video that Roger Daltrey might be rock's best vocalist, and this song right here is the proof. His sheer power is undeniable. And it ends here. The album doesn't grant any big revelations or bother to give you the answers. It just drops away, leaving Jimmy sitting all alone out there on that rock in the middle of the sea. Rain pouring atop his shoulders as he's overcome with emotion brought on by his own acceptance of vulnerability. I could go on and on about this record forever, but I think I'll just leave it at that. So let me know in the comments what The Who means to you. What would be at the top of your list? Is there an album that I severely underrated in my ranking? What band would you like me to make a best to worst on next? I'm open to suggestions. As always, thanks for watching. Leave a like if you liked and subscribe to this channel for more Left of the Dial content.